All right. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar review of HSAs for employers. My name is Amanda, and Larry Grugine will be your presenter today. We'll have plenty of information for you today, so don't worry if you don't catch everything. We're recording the webinar right now, and we'll email you the video and the slides after the webinar ends. Our next webinar is November 8th at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we'll be covering all of the healthcare legislation developments since our last legislative update webinar. We have actually a record number of participants today, so I'll be keeping the conference on mute. Larry will pause for questions periodically, and I'll unmute you so you can ask them. If you prefer, you can also type them in the question box below, and I'll ask the questions for you. Other than that, please enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What I'm going to be talking about today is every aspect of HSAs, from eligibility to contributions to benefits to reporting, and to get you a general feel of what HSAs are for employees so you can answer questions. Now, HSAs are a combination of IRAs, FSAs, and HRAs. There's pieces of all those in this HSA. They took parts of it, and I'll be talking about the similarities and differences between each of these. Pieces of it are, for example, there can be employer contributions and employee contributions under HSAs. In regard to HSAs, usually the money is held in a trust or custodial account, and basically the difference in all of the other accounts, similar to an IRA, is the fact that the employee controls how the money is spent. The employer has no say-so about how the money is spent, when it's spent. Once that money goes into the HSA, either made by the employee or by the employer, that's basically the employee's money, and they can do whatever they want. One of the interesting features of an HSA is the fact that what you can do as an employee is that once you start participating under the HSA, that as long as you save your receipts, you can reimburse yourself for anything at any time after you participate. So you could have expenses in 2016 and not reimburse yourself until 2020, 21, or 22. And when you do reimburse yourself, it doesn't have to be to pay for those expenses. You could use it as long as you have expenses to pay for other things. So this is totally different than what we're used to. It's something that has a very interesting aspects to it, but there's some complicated rules that you should know about, because there are certain traps which I will go through that some employees go through, especially when you're interfacing FSAs and HRAs, that could trip up an employee. So I'll be talking about those too. Now, this next slide is a very interesting, all of the various different features of an HSA that employers should consider in establishing. So there's funding flexibility. There can be employee contributions, pre-tax or post-tax contributions. There's no use it or lose it rule, and that's totally different than an FSA. Once the money goes in, the employee can't take it out. The employer cannot take it out, and it can be invested either through savings accounts or self-directed investments. Now, you can transfer money around between HSAs. In the past, there was a way of transferring money through a health FSA or HRA, but that's long gone. Now, you can transfer money between HRAs and HSAs. That could be one source of money. Now, if you have an emergency, you can use the funds for non-medical purposes, but you have to pay, in some situations, a penalty tax and income tax on those distributions. And again, because it's an employer-employee account, the money can be transferred to another HSA in any place the employee wants to, so it's their money. The employer may offer to contribute to employees' HSAs. And what some employers like is this self-substantiation of expenses. The employer doesn't have to be involved in how that money is spent. It's the employer that has to answer to the IRS if he or she ever gets audited. Now, again, many employers have high deductible plans. That's what you have to be participating under in order to be eligible. And so when this first was introduced in 2004, it wasn't too prevalent. Now it is. And most employers at least offer one option with the high deductible plan. And the source, and the government doesn't care what the source of money is. It can be family members, it can be employers, it could be other third parties can give you money to contribute to an HSA. The person who the money goes into gets a deduction. But again, they want to make sure these accounts are funded. So HSAs provide employees with tax-free basis for paying current medical expenses or medical expenses in the future. And as I said before, which is different than FSAs and HRAs, similar to IRAs, we use a tax-exempt trust or custodial account to hold the money. So banks are very involved in this. And with that aspect of it, it looks like an IRA in that sense. And some of the IRA investment rules apply to HSAs. So within limits, contributions to an deductible made by or for the eligible individual. Distributions from the HSA for qualified medical expenses are not includable in the employee's income. And then if you, again, as I indicated before, if you do use the money and it's not for qualified medical expenses, that distribution is, again, included in the employee's income. And if you're under a certain age, which I'll be discussing in a few minutes, you're subject to an additional 20% tax. Now, additional tax does not apply for distributions made after death, disability, when the individual attains age of Medicare. Now, you are no longer eligible to contribute to an HSA if you enroll in Medicare. And that's why some individuals delay enrollment in Medicare in order, and it's not whether you're eligible, it's whether you are enrolled. So a tax-free basis for paying current, okay, general use tax, okay, we got that. Oops, I'm going backwards, there we go. What happened here? Okay. Now for any month, is any individual who's defined as an individual who's covered by a high deductible plan, is not covered by any other health plan that is not a high deductible plan, is not enrolled in benefits under Medicare. So the month that you become eligible for or enrolled in Medicare, that's when your HSA contributions are cut off. So again, you have to enroll in Medicare. You cannot be claimed as a dependent by another person. The only exception to that is a spouse. And to be eligible to make or receive an HSA contribution for any month, an employee must meet all the requirements, including high deductible coverage as of the first day of the month. So what's important here is the fact that you can't be a participant under a general purpose FSA that reimburses you below the deductible for a high deductible plan. You cannot be in an HRA that reimburses below the deductible for a high deductible plan. And that's under the statute, the deductible is $1,300 for single and $2,600 for family. So again, an employee may not make or receive a contribution to an HSA. He or she is covered by a plan that's not a high deductible plan, and sometimes married couples cover each other. That's not possible. Or you're covered by a health FSA or HRA unless the coverage under such health FSA or HRA is limited to permitted coverage or permitted insurance. So what that means is under the HSA or HRA, below the deductible for a high deductible plan, you only can be reimbursed for dental, vision, and preventive care, and that once you meet the deductible at $1,300 and $2,600, then you can reimburse any medical expense. Now, one danger here, and this is extremely important, you have a married couple with a husband is participating in a high deductible plan, contributes to an HSA, and unbeknownst to him, his wife chooses coverage at her employer, signs up for a health FSA, and that health FSA covers the expenses for all of the family. But she understands the rule that her husband cannot be participating under an HSA, so she doesn't permit or she doesn't submit any expenses on his behalf. It doesn't matter. The law says that if she could have, it makes him ineligible. And that's something that many times employers don't explain to the employees. And, ask your spouse if he or she is participating under a health FSA or an HRA. So can an employee participate in either a health FSA or HRA in the same month and still be eligible? And this summarizes what I just indicated. No, unless the employee's situation is one of the following. The employee's expenses reimbursed under the health FSA or HRA are dental, vision, and preventive care. This is called a limited purpose. The employee suspends participation in the HRA, suspended. The health FSA or HRA pays expenses above the deductible, which is the post-deductible health FSA or HRA, or the HRA pays or reimburses the employees incurred after the employee retires. So again, this is something to stress to your employees, make them understand the fact that we're talking about themselves and their spouses, and they have to check and see whether any of these plans, any family member are participating under these plans. Now, what is a high deductible plan? Well, again, there are limits on deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses. For 2015, 16, and 17, the deductible must be at least $1,300 for single coverage and $2,600 for family coverage. And again, those are more prevalent than they were a few years ago. Many employers have much higher deductibles, but again, they must be at least that high in order to be considered to be a high deductible plan. Also, there is a deductible for out-of-pockets. This is $6,650 for single and $1,310 for family. And again, these amounts include deductibles, co-pays, and other amounts other than premiums. Now, this limit that you see here is a different out-of-pocket limit to be eligible under the ACA. There are two different limits. So that limit is different than this one. So to be considered to be a high deductible plan, this limit is much lower than the limit for a plan under ACA. So you just have to understand that and explain that to the employees. So how is the HSA established? Well, again, what you must do is execute the forms. It is probably the employer has a designated bank that is either the trustee or custodian, and they will have to execute HSA forms. There's a application form, and they'd have to probably do a designation of a beneficiary agreement, sign the forms for investments. There's no permission or authorization from the IRS that's necessary to establish an HSA. They just have to go to a designated bank or other financial institution in order to establish an HSA. And again, the eligible individual, the employer doesn't have to be involved, but some employers, and the law does allow this, the employer can designate for payroll purposes a bank they have to go to in order for the contributions to go through payroll. So the employer has that right to do so. And so instead of sending money to 15 or 20 different banks, they can say, if you want your contributions deducted through payroll, you have to go to this particular financial institution. And then again, the bank or other financial institution acts as the holder of the funds. Their only responsibility is to make sure they don't lose the funds. And also they have reporting responsibility to report the contributions and distributions. Now again, if the employer wants to permit pre-tax employee-made HSA contributions, what they can do is amend their cafeteria plan to provide pre-tax HSA contributions. And making these pre-tax HSA contributions, they must be voluntary. But the employer may provide that these HSA contributions through a negative election that we're going to have you, that money will be taken out of your paycheck unless you tell us otherwise. So again, as opposed to being a deduction, these pre-tax contributions, just like any other cafeteria plan contributions, are not subject to income tax, but also Social Security tax and Medicare tax, and this is a very popular option. But in order to do so, you must amend your cafeteria plan to permit that. And there's also other reasons to put pre-tax HSA contributions to a cafeteria plan. Are there any restrictions on the investments? And basically, you can invest in all kinds of stuff, and these rules are similar to HSAs. They can be bank accounts, annuities, certificates of deposit, stocks, mutual funds, bonds. The HSA cannot invest in life insurance contracts or collectibles. HSAs may invest in certain types of bullion or coins. But again, the bank, and you have to check with the bank or other financial institution to see what they permit investments under the HSA. And again, HSA's trust accounts may only be commingled in a common trust fund or common investment funds, and no other investments are permitted. But so the restrictions are similar to the ones that apply to IRAs. And again, that's another similarity with IRAs. Now, what contributions are permitted under the HSA, and how and are they treated for tax purposes? Okay, contributions to an HSA may be made in cash and may be made by an eligible individual, employer, family member, or any other third party. And contributions by a family member or third party are deductible in determining the adjusted gross income. In other words, if you don't make the contribution through a cafeteria plan, it's treated as a deductible in the front of your 1040 before to determine your adjusted gross income. So as we say, it's not on your Schedule A. It's actually deducted what we call above the line. And it's a great deduction. But again, if you contribute through a cafeteria plan, there's no deduction. The contribution, again, is pre-tax. This is only if you're contributing post-tax contributions, you receive a deduction. What contributions are permitted under the HSA and how are they treated for tax purposes? Again, the continuation. And again, individual making contributions cannot deduct the contributions of medical expense under 213. Employer contributions to an HSA include pre-tax salary reductions and employer matching contributions. And again, the employer cannot deduct employer contributions on his or her tax return as an HSA contribution. It's pre-tax. Now, there's a form you should write down, Form 8889, that you have to fill out every year as you file your 1040, that shows exactly what type of contributions you have, and that will then determine the amount of the deduction that goes on the form. And again, can pre-tax contribution be made? Yes. Have to be made through a cafeteria plan. And again, these contributions are treated as employer contributions, are not subject to income tax or employment taxes. And again, as I indicated before, you must amend your cafeteria plan. Now, what's interesting, and this is something to explain to your employees, even though it goes through a cafeteria plan, some of the cafeteria plan rules do not apply. And what we're talking about is the health FSA rules. The use it or lose it rule doesn't apply. The employee will never lose their money, as employees do under the health FSA. The uniform coverage rule does not apply, and that means that you can only take out what you've actually put in. So unlike a health FSA, the employer is on the hook for the entire contribution that the employee could have made, which is a different situation. Mandatory 12-month coverage rule. What that means is that any time, and the regulations say that the employee must be allowed to change their HSA contribution at least once a month. So all the change events that are in a cafeteria plan, and there's 12 or 13 or 14 of them, technically don't apply to HSA contributions. So for any reason, the employer must allow you to change your HSA contribution at least once a month. And that's what that slide is trying to explain. Are there any limits? And yes, each year there are limits on the maximum limit to an HSA. Some of the limits determined separately for each month. And again, it will determine based on whether you're covered by a high-deductible plan. So again, and it determines whether you're covered by the plan at the beginning of each month. So again, as long as you're covered by a high-deductible plan for each month during the year, then you are allowed to contribute for the full year. Now, an individual who becomes covered under the high-deductible plan any month other than January, and who is covered in the high-deductible plan in December. So let's say your employer switched to a high-deductible plan October 1st of this year. Before that, you're in a traditional plan, a non-high-deductible plan, and so you are participating in a high-deductible plan October, November, December. Now you have a choice. You can either contribute 4/12 of the limit, which I'll be explaining in a few minutes, or as this slide indicates, you can contribute the full limit for 2016. All right? And basically what this slide says is that, okay, if you make a full contribution under your HSA for the year, what this says, you have to stay in the high deductible for the rest of the testing period that you see here, and that's the next full calendar year. And if you as an individual do not remain as an eligible individual during the testing period, the amount of the contributions attributable to the months preceding the month in which the individual was not an eligible individual will be included in your income, and you'll pay additional 10% tax. So that means that if you don't do this, you're only in a high deductible plan for 4 months, So you could take 4/12 of the annual limit for your contribution. If you decide that you're going to take 12/12, you can use this method, and you're golden if you stay in the high deductible plan for all of 2017. If for some reason during 2017 you switch to a more traditional plan, then the 8/12 that you took will be taxable, and you'll have to pay an additional 10% tax. Now, as I said, there are limits. For single coverage for 2016, it was $3,350 for single coverage and $3,400 for 2017. For family coverage, you could contribute $6,750 for 2016 and 17. So again, the amount that you can contribute will depend on what coverage you have under the high deductible plan. It varies between single and family. Now, if you've reached 55 by the end of the taxable year, you can contribute an additional $1,000. That's called the catch-up contribution. So again, the only way technically you can contribute the full limit if you're in a high deductible plan covered by one for the full 12 months of 2016 or 2017. If you are not covered by 12 months, you can use the special rule, but again, you have to stay in the high deductible plan for all of the next calendar year. And again, this all the contributions, if you have more than one HSA, the total must meet the limits I just indicated. Annual limit is decreased by any contribution to an MSA. And the same annual limit applies whether the contributions are made by the employee, the employer, self-employed person, or family member. So again, as long as you're covered by a high deductible plan, it doesn't matter if you're an employee, an employer, owner, it doesn't matter. You can still contribute to an HSA as long as you're covered by a high deductible plan. And then what this slide indicates, you have until the due date of your tax return for the year. So for 2016, you have until April 15th of 2017 to make a contribution to your HSA. So again, even though the limits are applied monthly, you have until the due date of your tax return to make a contribution for the previous year. And again, not only can you contribute to an HSA by April 15th, but you can also establish an HSA by April 15th of the following year and make it apply to the previous year. So that's possible to do so too. All right, let's stop here. And Amanda, do we have any questions?
We don't have any typed, but I'm going to unmute so that you can ask.
Okay. Does
The conference has been unmuted.
Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Larry. My name's Shannon. I do have a question. You mentioned that a strategy could be to delay your enrollment in Medicare so that you could continue to stay on the, continue to fund the bank account.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen some court rulings that say the feds have never allowed or contemplated people to delay their enrollment in Part A.
Yes, you can.
And if they do, they're putting their Part A and Social Security benefits at risk.
No, that's not true. As long as you're in you can, for example, if you're covered by a high deductible, if you're covered by an employer plan, as long as you're covered by an employer plan, What you could do,
HSA stuff I want.
what you could do
Fortunately,
is wait until you terminate from the employer plan,
That's why I had.
and then you have 8 months after that to enroll in Medicare Parts A, B, and D. So as long as you,
Oh, yeah,
that's not true.
I'm aware of the Part B, that you can delay enrollment on that.
The enrollment in Part A is not automatic. It's not automatic.
I'd like to email you this court ruling and maybe get a little further opinion. I don't doubt what you're saying, it just contradicts the information I've been
No,
given.
I'm on Medicare and I had to enroll in Part A. It's not automatic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have any other questions?
Yes,
Hi,
I have a
quick
question.
question.
I'm Kirk here in San Jose. So let me understand, clarify my thinking on this. If you have a husband and wife, and the husband is, maybe he's covered by a health plan, even retired, but he's not 65 yet, but he's retired.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a health plan at his company, retiree health plan, and then the wife is still employed, and she gets an HSA plan, and he has a health HSA plan offered to him at his company at open enrollment come up December here, for example. My understanding is you can only have one HSA plan for a couple.
That's not true.
Is that true?
They have to be. What's important here is that there's no such thing as a joint HSA. Each individual, if they're eligible, can have their own HSA, but the combination of the contributions cannot exceed the family limit. Okay? So let's say, and let's look at this situation. Let's say you have a husband and wife, and they cover each other. Okay, and they're both in high deductible plans. So they have a choice in that situation of making the family limit contribution, which I think is $67.50. They can put $67.50 in one of their HSAs or split it up between the two. But the married couple cannot contribute more than $67.50 the family limit. So that's permissible. Now, one thing is important too. Let's say you have a situation where you have a husband and wife. All right. And the husband, the wife covers the husband under a family plan. And the husband also covers himself, but it's not a high deductible plan. So he is not eligible. But because she covers him, she could contribute up to the family limit to her HSA, but he cannot contribute at all. So you've got to be very careful on how you work this, but it's possible to do so.
My understanding would be to advise the client female spouse to say, look, tell your husband when it comes to open enrollment in December, just drop his plan, whatever it is, whether it's HSA or not HSA, but drop his plan and just put your husband on this HSA with me, as I'm the broker for the plan for the wife, and I'm going to just say, look, get rid of that plan so don't clutter it up, and let him be on your HSA plan because it's has a lower deductible actually than his.
Again, that's more financial, but again, in that situation, now, here's another situation. Suppose they both have individual plans. That's fine. But the limit, the couple, and in some years, the individual limits are higher than the family limits. They are limited by the family limit. Or let's say you have a husband and wife, and she covers the kids, and he has his own HSA, HSA. All the contributions between the two of them cannot exceed the family limit.
Right.
So please understand that. That's extremely important to understand. So the family is only limited to the family. Now, let's look at this situation. Suppose you had a family, and you have 3 sons. You have the husband and wife and 3 sons. They're aged 22, 24, and 25. All right? But the sons are not taken as a dependent. In that situation, because they're covered by the family plan, the husband and wife can have one family limit, and the 3 sons can have their own family limit. They could contribute up to the family limit for each of those 3 sons because they're covered by a family plan. And since they're not a dependent of their mother and father, they are eligible to contribute to an HSA. So these are things that are very important, and people should understand how these limits work. Okay? Are there any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
this is Dan, I have a question. Getting back to your first answer on that first question about having 8 months after your employer group plan terminates to enroll in Medicare A or B, are there any penalties? Do you know if there are any penalties for late enrollment in Medicare A or B due to that circumstance?
No, it's called a special enrollment. Look it up.
Okay.
That's a special enrollment situation. Now, there are late enrollment, for example. Another problem people have is, let's say somebody terminates. And what they do is, when they terminate, they don't enroll in Medicare. And what they do, they take COBRA. All right, COBRA is not considered to be employer-sponsored coverage. And after taking COBRA for 18 months, they enroll in Medicare. In that situation, they would be penalized because they're considered a late enrollee.
Cool. Great info. Thank you.
All right?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Larry, I have a couple written in. The first one is, so if a new hire starts October 1st with benefit eligibility, they could do full health savings contribution for 2016 of $3,350 as long as they stay in the HDHP until 2017?
Correct.
Okay. The next is, can both spouses make the $1,000 catch-up?
Yes.
Okay. If there's a specific, is there a specific limit or rule that applies if an employee became eligible to participate in the HSA at the last month of the plan year and subsequently reduces the amount they can contribute to the HSA for that plan year? So basically,
Well,
if they
as long as that person is covered by December of that year, they can make a full, they can make 1 month's contribution or 12 months.
So
If they make 12,
so even if they only became eligible in December, if they somehow were able to contribute $3,350 in December, that
they
would
could
be
do
fine?
so. They could, but they have to remain in the high deductible plan for the rest of 2017.
Alrighty.
Any other questions?
That's all that I have to do right now.
So in other words, the person who enrolls in 12-1 can either put away $3,350 or just a 1-month contribution,
Correct.
as long as he stays in that plan for the balance of the 2017, even though the plan year ends on 12-1 of 2017.
Doesn't matter. It's based on the calendar year.
So yeah, so if a person switches 12-1, then he's got 1 month where he goes back to fully insured. Then what? Does he get wiped out all that?
Yep, you get to remain for the whole year penalized. Look at that slide I just covered.
Yeah.
Look at that slide.
So he's basically, if he has to stay in an HSA for 2 years, then really, or every year, he's got to be careful because he'll get a big blowback on his deduction.
Correct.
He goes fully insured plan on 12-1-17.
Correct.
He has to pretty much stay there for the rest of his life until he goes to Medicare.
Correct. Now, let's stop the questions right here because we're running out of time and I have about 20 slides to go, so I just want to make sure I cover everything.
Okay.
Remember that if you over-contribute, and what happens many times with this is that individuals will make a full year's contribution at the beginning of the year, and then they change plans towards the end of the year, and they make an excess contribution because, let's say, they take a non-high deductible plan at the later year. That's called an excess contribution. This slide explains that basically you have until, and it's the employee's responsibility to do so, you have the responsibility of taking it out and its earnings by the due date of the tax return for the year. If you don't take it out, each year they're going to be assessed a 6% penalty if that money stays in there. So again, what usually happens, people put the whole amount in the beginning of the year and then forget about it and change plans and go to a non-high deductible plan towards the end of the year, and they forget they made it a full contribution. And that's something people should be made aware of.
Thank you. I'm going to remute the conference.
The
So again,
conference
this
has
is,
been muted.
again, when the excess contributions have to be removed, if the end of it is under 65 and is not dead or disabled, he or she will be subject to a 20% penalty tax on the earnings that's removed. Can amounts be rolled over to another HSA? Absolutely. If you decide that you took money out and you want to roll it back, you have no problem. You can do that. So again, you can, if you change your mind, if you don't need the money, you can roll it back. That's what this slide explains. And there's a no limit on the number of trustee-to-trustee transfers. You can transfer your money. There's a limit on only one a year in regard to rollovers. Can amounts distributed from the HSA, can they be distributed from an IRA be directly transferred to an HSA? And the answer is yes. You can do that. Now, what happens is you turn taxable money into non-taxable money by moving the money from the IRA to the HSA. It's considered to be a trustee-to-trustee transfer. And the amounts distributed from the HSA are not included on the employee's income. And then you don't get a deduction for that, but you turn taxable IRA money into non-taxable HSA money. And that such distributions are not subject to a 20% additional tax on early distributions. Now, in addition to that, if the employer is going to make a contribution, and it's not through a cafeteria plan, there's something called the comparability rules. So if the employer makes contributions to the employee's HSA, the employer must make comparable contributions, which mean they can only vary among the employees depending on what coverage they have, single, family, that type of thing. So they can say, if you have single coverage, I'll give you X, $500. If you have family coverage, I'll give you $1,000. That's permissible to do that. Can employer have to meet non-discrimination rules? And again, employers will be allowed to make larger HSA contributions for non-highly compensated versus highly compensated. But again, the employer can only vary it depending on what the coverage the employee has, and it must apply to all employees that are eligible. They can make it at the beginning of the plan year, the end of the plan year. It's up to the employer. They can make it during the year. But again, this only applies if the employer doesn't make it through a cafeteria plan. And then family coverage divided into self plus one, self plus two, self plus three. So you can vary the contributions depending on the coverage that the employee has. Now again, employer contributions through a cafeteria plan are not subject to those rules that I just mentioned because they're subject to the cafeteria plan rules. And why do people make employer contributions through a cafeteria plan? Because you can do matching, and also you can put contributions, employer contributions, into a cafeteria plan for HSAs under a wellness program. So you can do it that way. Instead of giving them cash, you can make an employer contribution through to an HSA so they can spend it on other things, health-related. So again, this is one way that many employers are using HSAs, especially participation in health risk assessment, disease management programs, where the contributions made by the employer, instead of being taxable, become non-taxable. Now, if the employer does not satisfy the comparability rules, vary the contributions outside the cafeteria plan, there's a excise tax of 35% of any amount that doesn't meet the requirement. So again, this is something that many employers should be made aware of. When are distributions to be made from the HSA, and what are the tax treatment? Again, as long as the distributions are for qualified medical expenses, there's no tax. And again, what many people don't understand, if you are participating in your coverage under a high deductible plan, it's single. That only determines your contributions. It doesn't apply to the distributions. So just because you have single coverage doesn't mean you can't reimburse the expenses of your spouse and your dependents. And anytime you reimburse unreimbursed medical expenses, it's not subject to any income tax. And again, you don't have to do it this year. As long as you keep your receipts, you can reimburse yourself years in advance. So again, unlike a health FSA or an HRA, there's no time limit of when these distributions have to be made. And again, qualified medical expenses are the same as you would under a health FSA. So again, it's the same definition. Now, qualified medical do not include expenses for insurance coverage except for long-term care premiums, premiums for COBRA, premiums for health coverage when an individual is receiving unemployment, are all considered to be medical expenses. So it's slightly different than a health FSA. In addition, qualified medical expenses for health insurance premiums for individuals subject to Medicare other than Medigap policies. So this includes Part A, Part B, Part D, and again, most individuals don't have Part A. But again, HSAs could be used for this purpose. If an individual is no longer an eligible individual, is over the age 65 and enrolled in Medicare, and no longer in the high deductible, distributions used exclusively to pay for medical expenses continue to be excluded. So again, as I said before, there's no time limits on when this money can be used. And again, if you take money out, it doesn't necessarily have to be used for paying expenses. You're just reimbursing yourself for past expenses. If distributions made for other than reimbursement of medical expenses, what are the consequences? Well, distributions from an HSA that are not for medical expenses are taxable. If you're not, it's not because of death, disability, or attaining age 65, then it's a 20% tax on that distribution. So, but again, it's the employee that determines when that money is spent. But again, what you could do in the situation, if somebody has a previous unreimbursed medical expenses, they pay it, they don't use the HSA, and then later in the year they buy a big screen TV for $1,000, that was the expense, there's no tax. So be extremely careful about that. So as long as you have any unreimbursed medical expenses, once that unreimbursement occurs, you can use it, and you take a distribution, you can use it for any purpose. What happens if the employee's HSA upon his death? If the beneficiary is the spouse, she basically assumes the HSA can be used for her purposes. So as long as that spouse continues to use the HSA for medical expenses, there's never any tax on it. So again, as long as the account holder is the surviving spouse, there won't be any tax. Now, upon the death of the HSA passes to a named beneficiary other than the surviving spouse, the HSA ceases to be an HSA, then you basically have to close it out, and then you have to take everything into income. That's what this slide explains. So again, they're encouraging the individual to name their spouse as a beneficiary, but again, once that money goes to anybody else, within a year that account has to be closed, and then those beneficiaries have to include that money in their income. If there's no named beneficiary upon the decedent's death, then it's basically included in the decedent's gross income. What reporting is there. As I indicated before, no matter if you're doing pre-tax or post-tax, it has to be indicated in the Form 8889. If you're interested, every year I do an analysis of the 8889 and I give instructions how to complete it. Yeah, that 8889 is to report both distributions and contributions. Employer contributions are required to report on Box 12 and Form W-2 using code W. Employer contributions include employer contributions and also pre-tax contributions to a cafeteria plan. Now, in addition, HSA trustees and custodians must report contributions on the Form 5498-SA and distributions on the Form 1099-SA. So, again, similar to IRAs. Are there any additional questions?
We have...
Amanda, do we have any additional questions?
Yep, we have one. Hold on just a second. Oh, we have several, sorry. For the long-term care premium as an eligible expense, can the participant use the HSA to pay for the LTC premium regardless of whether they're actively working or retired?
Yeah, it can be paid, sure.
How does an employee handle a situation if both employers are providing contributions? What if we provide a health savings contribution because they have single coverage with us? Their spouse gets an FSA contribution by their employer because they have a single coverage with their employer. How do you handle that?
Well, again, if it's an excess contribution, then one of them has to remove the contribution and include into income as an excess contribution. So, again, any excess contributions are responsibility of the employee to remove. Not the responsibility of the employer, but the employee. In this situation, each individual is, again, responsible for their HSA, making sure they remove excess contributions, make sure amounts are being paid for proper amounts, because you, as an individual of your HSA, report whether that distribution is taxable or non-taxable. Unlike an FSA or an HRA, the employee is not looking over your shoulder. It's you that reports that on the Form 8889. And then it goes on your 1040 if it's taxable. So again, you as an employee have to remove your excess.
Okay. Is the transfer from an IRA only allowed once in a lifetime?
Yes.
Okay. If I have 3 medical options, all HDHP, can I provide a different level of contribution for the different choices?
If it's outside of a cafeteria plan, you can't do that. You can only vary depending on what your coverage is. So it's either single, family, and inside the family can be self plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4. Now, inside a cafeteria plan, you could do that, but each level would have to pass the cafeteria plan non-discrimination rules. So that's the only downside to that.
If I had single plan A and... Okay, that was just a continuation of that question. So I'm going to unmute so that anybody can ask any further questions.
The conference has been unmuted.
Anybody have any further questions?
I have one question. This is John in San Jose. I heard you say that if you have bills, medical bills, you can reimburse yourself later.
Right.
If I start my HSA plan in January, and I had a bill back in December that's coming due now, and I pay it out of my HSA.
I'm sorry, what? No, you're breaking up.
Starting my HSA plan in January.
You started your HSA in January, yes?
Right. I had a bill for December that is now coming due.
Well, it all depends because remember, what determines what can be reimbursable if it incurred after you became eligible for the HSA. So if you started in January and the expense was in December, you can't get reimbursed for it. It must incur after you are eligible for the HSA, or the account was established, excuse me.
Okay. Now, one other question, as long as I have you, you kept using high deductible plans. There are a number of high deductible plans that do not qualify as HSA plans. Does it really make a difference?
Yeah, it has to meet the basic requirements in the definition I showed you during the slides. So the deductible has got to be $1,300 for single. It's got to meet the deductible limits and the out-of-pocket limits. Now, again, I warn people that the out-of-pocket limits are slightly higher under ACA, and those would not qualify to being a high deductible plan for HSA purposes. So you've got to be real careful in that regard.
Hi, this is Karen in San Diego. I kind of have a question.
Okay.
This is my first time dealing with this. Our open enrollment is 12/1, and the owner has told me we're going to be offering an HSA plan to our employees, but nobody's probably going to use it, and we're not going to be providing the financial institution. He'll be making his own contributions. He's going to choose that. Mm-hmm. Is there anything special I need to do or that I'm required to do information to provide to the employees?
Well, the bank will give them an explanation of HSAs, but I think you have to sit them down and basically tell them. And the biggest issue I see in understanding this is somebody picks a high deductible plan. You have to indicate to them is you have to talk to your spouse to see what other coverage they have, because if they have a health FSA and they've been participating in it, that may deter you from being eligible to contribute to an HSA. So that's the biggest issue I've seen, especially with married couples, is that the one spouse doesn't know what the other spouse has, and you got to be real careful to see if they're contributing under a flex plan. And if they are, chances are it covers the whole family.
Okay, well, we don't have a flex plan.
No, I'm talking about the other, the spouse.
Right, the wife or the
husband,
okay.
Right.
Okay, so I'm kind of confused on. So they picked the HSA plan. Mm-hmm. Now it's their own responsibility to go to a financial institution and set it up. But what if they never make a contribution? Does it matter to us, the company?
Not really. I mean, it's their responsibility. Most employers do it through payroll deduction.
Yeah, and we won't be doing that.
Yeah, see, most employers do that to encourage employees to make it easy for them.
Right, but he doesn't want the company to have the responsibility of doing the deductions. So I'm kind of confused on what my responsibilities are to make sure I meet all the requirements.
Just make sure they understand the fact that if they want to make a contribution, it's up to them, and it's going to be their responsibility. It's their account. You're not going to be involved.
Okay, so there's really nothing else I need to do. I just provide them with the information. If they
Correct.
pick it, then it's up to them, and they need to realize if they don't have the money to cover the deductible, it's still their responsibility.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I have a couple
Any other
more
issues or
employer.
problems?
Yep.
Yes.
Can an employer provide different HSA contribution amounts based on employee class?
If it's not through a cafeteria plan, no. If it's through a cafeteria plan, the only way they can do it if they pass the cafeteria plan non-discrimination rules.
Can the plan provide first dollar coverage such as co-pays for office visits or prescriptions?
No.
Do the husband and wife have to contribute to their catch-up amounts to separate HSA accounts?
Yes.
Okay.
If they want, now remember, all the money could go to one spouse versus another spouse. They don't have to have two. They can, but they don't have to.
Okay. Someone said, I was told that you must stop the HSA contributions 6 months before Plan B starts. starts? Part B starts because Social Security...
That's only if you, with regard to sign up for Social Security benefits. They retroactively do the Medicare coverage.
Yeah.
So if you sign up for if you don't sign up for Social Security, there's no issues. In other words, there's a difference because you sign up for Medicare at 65.
Yeah.
But your Social Security doesn't start till 66 or 67 or 68.
Yeah.
At that point, then they go back, if you haven't signed up for Medicare.
If I have an active employee with a health savings account, can they use those funds to pay for Medicare premiums?
Yes, they can do it, but again, they can only do it if they're eligible. If they have an older spouse, they can't do it for them.
Okay. You said a family with grown children, 25, 26, and 27, could set up a separate family contribution. I'm assuming they would have to be on their own HDHP plan to do this?
No, my example was you have a whole, my whole family was, the last child was under 26.
Okay.
So you have 22, 24, 25. And they're in their family's plan. So you have one family coverage. You have the husband and wife and 3 kids. Okay? Now the husband and wife get one family limit amount. Each of the 3 sons gets her own family limit. So the family gets 4 $67.50 amounts. Now each son gets their own deduction. The father and the mother don't get it, but they get it because I said that the kids are not treated as dependents. So here, the family could contribute a lot of money.
And they'd be contributing all to the same financial institution, or would the boys have to have their own set up?
It's up to the employer how they want to do it. But again, you know, one thing that I tell people, if your employer requires you to go to a particular financial institution, that's fine. But 20 minutes after that contribution is made, you have the right to transfer it to a financial institution of your choosing, because once that money goes into your account, you are again control how that money is used. So even though your employer says you have to set it up at XYZ Bank, it doesn't have to stay at XYZ Bank. It can be transferred to another HSA.
Okay.
Any other questions?
That's all I have on my end. Does anybody else have any?
Well, if anybody has any further questions, that's my contact information. I've been dealing with HSA since 2004, so I know all the issues. So thank you very much, and hopefully you found this useful. Take care.
Oh, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Like I said, our next webinar will be on November 8th.
Thank you.